House Bill 1157, which has been read. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, engrossed House Bill 1157 was introduced by Representatives B. Koppelman and other House and Senate sponsors. Engrossed House Bill 1157 is a bill for an act to create and enact a new subdivision to subsection 2 of section 62.1-02-05 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to elected public officials and concealed weapons at publicly owned and operated buildings. To amend and reenact section 62.1-01-01 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to definitions. Mr. Speaker, your Judiciary Committee recommends amendments which are passed on the previous sixth order. When so amended and engrossed recommends do not pass on engrossed House Bill 1157 by a vote of 8 yeas, 5 nays, and 0 absent not voting. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hawken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I should try that. It's a do not pass, vote red. However, I think this has a good bit of discussion between this and a couple of other bills that will be coming our way. 1157 is a bill that would allow concealed carry in public buildings. Initially, it was a carve-out, so it would just have been legislators. It was amended in 3 ways. The first was to include appointed and elected officials. The second is to exclude the court facilities. And the third was to identify and put in definitions what a dangerous weapon is. That was a request to take stun guns out of the definition for dangerous weapons. It was very interesting in that both the proponents of this bill and the opponents of this bill utilized the same rationale, and that was safety. Those in favor said it would be safer if we had handguns in the chamber. The Highway Patrol said they felt it would be safer if we did not have guns in the chamber. And the main reason behind that was the training piece. This morning on the Today Show, they had a deal about policemen and their training for using their weapons. And the speed at which it happens. A policeman could get off a shot, 4 shots within 1.1 seconds. And then they commented that 40% of the time they miss the target, and they practice. So our law, it was interesting doing the research on this, our law for getting a concealed weapon carry permit is very, very easy. Basically, you take an open book test. There is a piece about shooting at a target, but it's about 10 feet away, and apparently the story goes a blind man did that. So that's not a big deal. But no, Kansas, who has in their chamber a bill similar to this, has an 8-hour course. Texas has a 16-hour course. The other thing that was interesting is, like our license plates and our driver's license, our fee does not cover the cost. That always bugs me. I want us to just cover the cost, not charge extra, just cover the cost. But it's $140 in Kansas. There are 7 states, I believe, that either have or are in the process of having legislation to do this exact thing. It was the committee's decision by a narrow margin that looking around and the close proximity in this room, that we were probably safer if we left the guns to the Highway Patrol. I will leave that to your discretion. It is a do not vote, do not pass, bill 8-5.
Representative B. Koppelman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I introduced this bill after giving a lot of thought to what we would do in this chamber if we were in an active gunman situation. And as many of you know, in Canadian Parliament, they had a situation such as that. In their particular chamber, their sergeant-at-arms have a little different charge than our sergeant-at-arms do, and they're armed and ultimately neutralize the threat. However, when you look at our Capitol and how open many of our public buildings are, you'll notice you don't see metal detectors at the doors. You see, in our case, a few highway patrolmen that patrol the halls, but not necessarily guards stationed everywhere that would need to be to have a large deterrent for any sort of violent circumstance that might come into this chamber. We heard one of the other proponents for this bill came in and testified that he had a lot of experience and knowledge about active gunman situations, and talked about how in a matter of seconds most of the damage is done if somebody wanted to do that. So although it's an unpleasant thought, if you can all imagine someone who worked up our back stairway, came down this side aisle, and came out in the front, and if it was a time when Highway Patrol was not in this chamber, which I am pleased to see they are today, what would we do? There may be ways that we could notify them of the threat. If they're downstairs or wherever they were, I'm sure they would do their best to get here as quickly as possible. However, that would probably be after 1 or 2 clips were unloaded into this chamber. Now, some members of the committee felt that having this bill did create a risk if a legislator were concealed carrying and missed their target. And that's probably true. However, that compared to the loss of life that could happen with being completely unarmed and not having any way to fight back is much greater. Now, I believe the Highway Patrol came in. I don't believe they were against the bill. I don't believe they said that they necessarily preferred that we not carry. I think what they said is, if we were carrying and if somebody had drawn their weapon to protect themselves or others during an event like that, that it might slightly delay their reaction in who they pursued as the perpetrator in this chamber. However, many lives may have been saved and the threat may have been neutralized by the time they got here. So I hope all of you will think about that. I, for one, do not want to see metal detectors and mass amounts of armed guards in our Capitol. I like our open process. I like that kids can come sit next to us on the floor. But I do really want to make sure that we do something to have some preventative measure. Make them think twice and say, hey, if I come into the capital of North Dakota and I want to do something malicious, I may be harmed in the process also. So please vote green.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to mention that there were some of us that voted no on this bill, not because of the reasons stated, but because this carves out an elite group of people that are able to conceal carry. And I'm definitely in favor of our rights to bear arms, but to say that just those elected officials are able to carry concealed weapons seems to set us apart as an elite group of people that would be able to have this privilege. So that's the reason that I voted no.
Is there further discussion? Representative Kay Koppelman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. Just one quick correction to something we heard as the bill was introduced. It was not originally introduced for legislators, as indicated. It included all public officials, so the committee actually narrowed in its amendments the people who it applies to. It didn't broaden them except for one aspect, and that was that the original bill didn't have any provision regarding appointed officials. And the question came up, well, what happens if somebody is appointed to an office that is normally an elective office, as happens in this chamber sometimes, I'm sure happens in some other areas. And so that was why that was changed. But it was narrowed from all elected officials, as you can see in the bill, to specifically members of the Legislative Assembly, members of a governing body of a county or city, and school board members. And members of the Assembly, this is one where I voted differently than our committee, and you need to vote your conscience here, but the thinking clearly, although you've heard this, was not to create an elite class. It was instead to say people working in this fishbowl every day and in circumstances similar, when someone comes in to the building knowing this building is a gun-free zone, they don't care about obeying the law. It's a similar discussion as we've had with churches, schools, other things that we've dealt with before. And those also are situations where very unique parameters apply to who can and cannot carry. But the point is there's someone that may. And I think even the question, if this bill were to pass and if no one were ever to exercise the authority it gives, just the question of someone who wanted to do harm, coming in here not knowing whether there might be a gun on the other side of those he's victimizing, might give pause. And I think that's worth a green vote.
Representative Ammerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member Assembly, as you know, I oppose the gun in school bill, and it has really nothing to do with guns. I have more guns than I know what to do with. I hunted all my life and that type of thing. But the reason I vote against these type of bills, I guess a little deeper. When we have a wonderful system here, we've had a wonderful way of life, and the freedom we have is just terrific. And when you change your way, if terrorists act throughout the world, throughout North Dakota, throughout Canada, if they make you change your way of thinking, that you have to carry, now I better carry guns, terrorism wins. Terrorism wins, maybe just a little bit, when you give in and say, okay, I guess I better change my lifestyle now. As great as it is, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't give them that little victory, because to me, they win, and I can't let them win, because, you know, we got a pretty good life here in the United States. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't plan on talking any more gun bills today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion? The House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1157. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Do any members wish to change their vote? The key will be closed and the clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 45 yea, 47 nay, 2 absent, not voting. House Bill 1157 fails.